if you step foot off the campus, which he noted is over 7 miles away from downtown Salt Lake City and in the middle of nowhere, with no public transportation. State officials have said they expect the facility to cost $75 million to construct, plus more than $30 million per year for ongoing operations. Bill Tibbetts, Deputy Executive Director of Crossroads Urban Center, a low-income advocacy nonprofit based in Utah, has said that for a facility to treat such a large number of people adequately, the cost will be much higher than $75 million. Tibbetts also warned that the construction of a homeless shelter in such close proximity to a facility for involuntary commitment would create an atmosphere of fear that would deter homeless people from seeking help. A 300-400-bed mental and behavioral health facility that people are not allowed to leave is not a shelter but an incarceration option, Tibbetts wrote in an email to the Utah News-Dispatch. Having such a facility co-located with a shelter would probably lead to a sense that if you do not follow the rules in one facility, you could be moved into the other. Although the Trump administration has portrayed homelessness as primarily the result of addiction or mental illness, Tibbetts noted that the majority of the people who visit a shelter are not chronically homeless. They just need a place to stay following a short-term period of financial hardship. A senior citizen who had their rent increased beyond what they could afford, he said, is not going to want to go to a quasi-correctional facility to get help finding a place to live that they can afford. Stephen Prager, Common Dreams.
Utah has a plan to deal with homelessness, lining up behind President Trump's belief that people should not be allowed to sleep on the streets. State officials say they're preparing to pull more than 1,000 homeless people out of Salt Lake City and into a sprawling campus on the outskirts of town. Supporters call it a place where people can get the services they need. Critics call it a detention camp. Joining us now, New York Times reporter Ellen Berry, who filed that piece from Salt Lake City. So what exactly is this campus, this camp?
So for now, this is still in its planning stages. It hasn't been built, but it is definitely an effort to kind of operationalize the president's executive order from the summer, which said that overwhelmingly homeless people are suffering from mental illness or addiction, and overwhelmingly they should be put into long-term institutional care. That is a reversal of our longstanding approach to homelessness, which has prioritized housing. So this plan is a very large facility that would be devoted in large part to treatment of psychiatric and substance abuse disorders.
So it's kind of, you could argue, bringing back mental health institutions, which had fallen out of favor. There are arguments on both sides of this, as you well know, as you've reported. There are people who say it is not a good idea to let people suffer on the streets, that some people really do need help and they're not capable of getting themselves that help. And there are others that say if you force them into an institution or a camp or a campus, whatever you want to call it, and you don't allow them to leave, you violate their civil rights, you violate their free will. Do we have a sense of what this campus, if it's actually going to be staffed, if it's actually going to have the resources they need, and how it's going to be funded?
There are lots of questions, and those are some of the most important ones. The proposal, as I understood it, is actually a hybrid with about 1/3 of the beds, a kind of low barrier shelter, so that would be presumably voluntary, and the other 2/3, 800 beds, would be involuntary. Either through civil commitment procedures or a diversion program through the courts. So you're sort of looking at a large facility that is in part involuntary and in part voluntary.
Do we know who's paying for this?
Well, it would have to be the Utah legislature, and that is a big question mark, whether there is going to be willingness to fund it. And I think the fear is that if this ball gets rolling and the services are not funded, then it becomes much more of a warehousing type facility and less of a treatment facility. So this is what is not yet clear. It's expensive to create psychiatric beds, and across the country we have a shortage of psychiatric beds for that reason. So expanding psychiatric treatment in this way would be extraordinarily expensive.
Yeah. Ellen Berry. Ellen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Joining us now, Utah State Senator. She was featured in that piece, Jen Plum, a Democrat who represents Salt Lake City. She's also an ER physician. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me here.
What are your concerns?
You know, this is a space that I have been passionate about and touched by for decades, starting with my own brother facing heroin dependence and addiction and ultimately losing him to that. And then coming into the space as a clinician and an advocate, and now as an elected person, I think that I share the hopes that many of those thinking in this space are, and then that is what we can get people better lives, and that we can do things with policy that will get people into spaces where they aren't living in such desperation. But seeing this proposal and seeing it come from a homeless services board that doesn't have a single medical person on it to represent what it would take, I'm worried that these good intentions have the potential to lead to wasted time, wasted money, and violations of people's civil liberties. So for me, that's kind of the, in a nutshell, concerns that I have.
That is a good point. And again, I think it's important to remember that there are people that do really need help and are struggling, and there are family members who want their loved ones to get the help that they need. And sometimes, in some cases, voluntary is not necessarily an option. That being said, you are a part of the legislature and you've expressed your concerns. Is there a way to amend any legislation that might come up to make it so that it's mandatory to have a certain number of healthcare professionals, of addiction professionals, psychiatric professionals on staff and there every year in order to make sure that these places don't become detention centers?
I think that's really a crucial point. And how much of that happens in policy and code versus how much of that happens in planning, that all remains to be seen. You know, we've almost hit this inflection point where folks are saying, oh, housing first didn't work. Now we need this treatment first model. And for me, I don't see it that there